people might not be as interested in your story as you think they are, because we all have a story. We've
So
all
true.
experienced trauma
Yeah.
and tragedy and trial and tribulation. We've all gone through stuff. The story is important, but what's more important is how you tell the story and the lessons that you give to the reader.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Cultural Conversations podcast, friends, meeting cultural challenges with biblical solutions. We need the wisdom of God in our nation right now. Thank you so much for being with me. I'm here with a very special guest, a longtime friend, Mr. Tom Freiling, who's chairman and CEO of Freiling Agency. It's a full-service book publishing and marketing agency for influential leaders and their organizations. We're going to dig into that and unpack what that means quite a bit. Here, Tom is a publishing industry, a C-suite veteran, pioneer in digital publishing, and has a history of launching wildly successful books, brands, and organizations. He served on multiple boards, served at a senior level in America's largest media companies, and also as an entrepreneur and a CEO. And the publishing company that Tom founded has been acquired by a NASDAQ media company and has generated more than $100 million in revenue. Tom has sold millions of books, and as a writer and a collaborator, he's represented and published multiple New York Times best-selling authors. Quite an extensive resume, advisory council on the Harvard Business Review, member of Forbes Business Council, and a best-selling author. You've been all over the media, impacted so many different areas. Tom, welcome to the show. It's good to be together again.
Thank you, James. It's been, we go back at least 10 years.
Yep.
Probably further back than that. And I remember 10 years ago, or maybe a little further back than that, when we met the first time to talk about your book, Zero Victim.
Yep.
And that's also been wildly successful. So just blessed to be a part of that, to see it being birthed, and then to see what you've been able to do with that message around the world. So
Yep.
yeah.
Thanks, Tom. We're going to unpack your role in that process. And I want to speak today. We're going to talk to influencers. We're going to talk to authors and folks that feel like they have a message and something significant to say, but getting that message out for the sake of good, and God's glory in our nation is really important. We're going to talk about that. Now, you're an ORU guy.
I am an ORU guy,
Yep.
1988 grad of ORU.
All right.
Still love the university. I was fortunate and blessed enough to have spent some time with Oral Roberts back in the 80s.
Very nice.
Oral himself. So
What was that? What was that like?
Well, what was that like? He was obviously a very charismatic individual. When he walked into a room, his presence loomed very large. And he was a great visionary. He truly was. He built that university, in a matter of maybe 10 years, debt-free, built an entire university.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's happened since. It certainly doesn't happen today. So his legacy is very important for, in the lives of many people, and certainly in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, just for a moment, you think about the great Oral Roberts. Pat Robertson passed a little while ago. Man, there was a season where these giants emerged, and they did some pretty audacious things to really step out to do some things that were unthinkable, that so many lives have been affected because of them.
Yeah, they were pioneers.
Yeah.
They were pioneers. They're church fathers, in America and around the world. So, and I think we need to remember that and emulate, them and their pioneering spirit.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Now, at RU, was that the time that you were first introduced into student government and policy and, politics? We've talked quite a bit. You've been involved in that space in terms of influencing culture and policy writing. What has that journey been like for you? And why would you even say it's important to be involved in politics? You get this idea that politics are bad, believers should stay out of politics. I think the contrary is actually true, that you need to be right there where policy is being made. So what are your thoughts about being an influencer in that space?
Yeah, well, that's true. I started with a United States congressman when I left school. I was a political science major, went to work for the mayor of Tulsa, who then became United States congressman, who was then elected to the United States Senate, James Inhofe, who is retired now. So that's where I, launched as a young man into politics. And my life and really my career has been a mix of both, business and politics. Also ran a political action committee, a super PAC, in about 10 years ago. So I agree with you 100%. If we were all to withdraw from public policy and politics, it wouldn't be a pretty picture, right? So I think we need to be mindful of maybe some balances there. We are called to glorify God and serve God and not man. So, and there's always going to be, in terms of public policy and politics, we can never serve that. That's not our master, right? The Lord Jesus is our master, not politics and not the president. So there are limits, but that being said, if we were to completely withdraw from the political process, I think we know what would happen.
So well stated, man. That what you just shared needs to be communicated and reiterated, I think, across the nation right now, and even to believers. You never felt an inclination to run for politics, even though you've been involved on the back end. Never felt that you needed to be a candidate for any particular office?
Oh, every day.
Yeah. Still, maybe
every day.
You have something you want to announce?
No, not
on
today.
The podcast right now?
No, I mean, I have thought about it. I think many people have. But it's a big sacrifice. It's a big commitment. To do that. So you have to. I think you'd have to count the cost beforehand. Know what you're getting into, especially in today's environment.
I think about it a lot. Like, it goes through my mind. A lot, You just mentioned, something very, very important to identify, that, Jesus is our master as believers, but we need to engage in being salt and being light. There are these passages like Matthew 5 that tells us that, if a city is not set on a hill, what I mean, that basically what good is it? We are a city that's set on a hill, and we're to let our light shine before men. And passages like Proverbs chapter 1 verse 20 says that wisdom cries aloud in the public square, in the concourse, in the marketplace. And so there is a place where the wisdom of God has to be applied to mainstream society that I think we can't withdraw from.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, good deal, man. So so much to talk about here. So when I think of you as a coach to influential leaders, in addition to being a leader yourself. And we've experienced some great success with the Zero Victim franchise, not just a book. And I want to talk about that, because a book is one entity, but I use the term franchise because there's been many spinoffs of the Zero Victim message and the ideology, how it affects other areas, other arenas, and morphs into different entities. And you've been a huge partner in me being able to do that. But a coach to influencers. So let's start with this idea. Why do influencers, and not only people who want to be successful, but people who are already successful, why do they need coaching from your perspective?
That's a great question. I think, let's use a couple of analogies. Athletes, whether they're amateur or professional athletes, they highly value having a coach, right? So do musicians. Whether you're playing an instrument or you are a singer, you recognize the value of a coach. And I think the value for an athlete or a musician is taking you from good to great, right? There's a lot of good people out there. And whether you're an influencer in business or in ministry, whatever your sphere is, you might be good, but there's a big difference between being good and being great, and sometimes there are just nuances in how you deliver a message or what your message is. It's a game of inches, right? It's like in a race in the Olympics where the winner might win by maybe 1/100th of a second or something, right? Wow. And it's the coaching that helps you take that last step, the last 10%, 5%, 1%, to take your message and your content to the next level.
Yeah. You used language that I haven't heard before that really brings a lot of clarity to the importance of coaching. When you talk about the top 1% going from good to great, I think that technology itself has made made it so that we're in global competition for everything that we do. And so now you're competing around every other individual in the world in a global space that going from good to great makes all the difference in terms of impact and engagement. So let's talk a little bit more. The adjustments, you talk about sports, the adjustments to your swing, your posture, your stance, it's the nuances that really determines success, not so much even just the fundamentals anymore, but there are nuances to help you kind of create a razor sharp profile and a point of precision, I guess, into industry that's needed right now. You've seen that evolution over time.
Yeah, and my background is in books and publishing. I'm a book publisher, and so if we look at that, the difference between a good writer and a great writer is what? It's just different words that they choose to use in a different way, right? There's a lot of good writers out there, but to take that jump to be a great writer, sometimes it's just a few adjustments in the writing, right? The use of words. You maybe replace 2 or 3 words, word them a little bit different way. Sometimes it's not that big. You don't think it's that big of a change, but it actually is that big of a change, right? So I think in all communication today, well, the great thing about communication today in media is that it's been democratized. Anybody can, using their phone, right? Anybody can become an influencer. But to become the kind of influencer that is truly influential, you have to be very careful in your choice of words, how they're delivered, how you look, how you position yourself, how you say it, how you write it. And none of that is as easy as it looks, I'm sure, as you're aware of.
You're touching on something that I think culturally we're not paying enough attention to, how precision in communication really separates people and sets you apart. Not just what you say, but how you say it. And you talked about wordsmithing, the precision of changing just a few words, because that translates into the marketplace. I think that translates into how you prosper, who gets a raise, who doesn't get a raise. And I think that in society today, we're not talking enough about the importance of communication and putting emphasis on it. And I know in a number of settings in society that it's kind of the cultural cool things to kind of talk slang. In the Black community, we kind of have this language and this dialect that we use. But when it comes to business and when it comes to success and being in the top 1%, you're communicating that the use of language and mastering language brings you into that top 1%, that is still a benchmark and a rule for entering into a higher level of success.
Certainly.
You're kind of helping us understand that.
Yeah, certainly. And these days, it's not just what you say, but what you don't say, or maybe saying something the wrong way that could become a lightning rod for negative feedback. And we've all seen many people have accidentally or inadvertently said one thing a little bit, maybe in a way they shouldn't have said it, and it really comes back to bite them. So,
not to mention it's permanently archived on digital media right now, which is a liability.
And that speaks to the precision that you're talking about. So I think as a coach and working with authors and influencers, that's really what I try to hone in on, is be careful what you say, how you write it, think it through. Right, don't do it carelessly.
So good, folks. If you're just joining, I'm with an industry veteran, my good friend, CEO and chairman of Freiling Agency, Tom Freiling, and you're hearing content really from a veteran's perspective, a coach of leaders in terms of how to craft your message and how to craft your brand at a time that needs to be done with precision. Make sure you go to FreilingAgency.com to hear a lot more and to read a lot more about the work that Tom is doing. So a couple of questions here. How many books have you published? How many have you written? And big question here, why should people even read books?
That's a great question. I've lost count because it's been too many years, but I've been involved in thousands of books. And hundreds of best-selling books and best-selling authors. Some I have ghost written. I can't tell you who those are because I'm a ghost. We have
NDAs.
I tell people, if I tell you, I'd have to kill you. So, but I mean,
there'll be a lot of dead people in America.
That's true. That's true. I mean, it's been a blessing. I didn't intend on being a book publisher. That wasn't my plan early on. I fell into it, but obviously God had a plan for me and my life, in that area. So. It's been an amazing journey, and I am, as a book publisher, fortunate to work with a lot of really amazing and interesting people, along the way. So, but the question about why do we read books, that is a great question, because I love to read books. You love to read books.
Yep.
I love to go to bookstores and libraries. I could spend hours in a bookstore, right? And I ask myself, why? Why am I doing this, right? I think there's really only two reasons we read. I think we read to solve a problem or to escape a problem, right?
Wow,
Or
that's huge.
problems.
Yeah.
That's why some people read a lot of fiction.
It's huge.
Fiction is just escaping life. It's like watching a movie or watching television, but some people choose to read. It's an escape, right? But for nonfiction books, we truly are looking to solve the problems that we have in our life,
Wow.
right?
I've never heard that language before. That's incredibly precise. We read books to either solve a problem or to escape a problem. Wow.
Yeah, indeed. And sometimes that might be learning, because sometimes I will read a book to learn. I like to read about the early church, for example. Why do I like to do that? I like to learn about the early church because I'm interested in how to apply what the original Christians learned, right? Those who were closest to Christ, those who lived right after Christ. I want to know more about their lives and about the church, at that time, because I want to apply that in my own life. So, yeah, those are the two reasons. And I think if we, as a writer or as an author, you have to ask yourself that question also.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, I've never heard it phrased that way. I hear it all the time. So many people, I want to write a book. I'm writing a book.
Right.
But if you don't start with the question in terms of why people even read books, that certainly affects the direction that you take and even the quality of what you write if you don't have the end result of the user in mind. It's not just I have this burning message that I just like and I like talking about it, so I want to get it out to write my book. That's not a good motive for writing a book anymore without some benefit to the user.
That's true. A lot of people will approach me with the idea of writing a book about their story.
Yeah.
It's very common. And my response usually is people might not be as interested in your story as you think they are, because we all have a story. We've all experienced trauma and tragedy and trial and tribulation. We've all gone through stuff. The story is important, but what's more important is how you tell the story and the lessons that you give to the reader. Because we're interested in reading about the lives of other people. Well, some of it is curiosity, but some of it is also, we want to apply that to our own lives. We're trying to figure out how to live life and live it better. And we look to other people to do that. So I encourage people to write and to try to publish a book about their story, but don't make it just about you, make it about the reader. It's not about you, it's about the reader.
So let me ask you, in this platform, this kind of multi-dimensional platform, how would you parse telling that story in a book versus a blog versus social media posting versus op-ed, writing as an op-ed writer? Like, because everybody just thinks I want to write a book, and okay, you can have 2,000 copies of your book on your shelf of your story, but if you want to get into monetizing that book and creating a product, because publishing is a business, what would you say about those different platforms of blogging versus a book versus social media?
Yeah, well, I think you just summed it up. Publishing is a business, and authors sometimes forget that. There is a permanence about a book that a blog doesn't have or a social media account doesn't have. And because there's permanence, you have to be more careful when you write a book than you might be when you write a blog. Some of the best-selling books of our generation were written over many years. It wasn't like a blog post or a social media account. We're sort of used to everything being instant in our society. Well, a book should not be written instantly. You need to take more time and be more careful about your words and what you're writing, because it's going to be there forever. So, and I think sometimes people they want to hurry up the process because they want a book.
Should you write a book if you don't have an audience? Because some folks, do you write the book hoping for the audience, or should you write a book in response to serving an audience that you have?
I think both. I think it depends on your goals, right? And also what God has put on your heart. The number of copies that you sell is not necessarily important, right? Your book might influence one person, impact one person, who then changes their life in a significant way, and then influences a lot of other people, right? Maybe impacts a generation. So I encourage authors not to think about how many people are going to read your book, right? How big the audience is going to be. Don't think about that. Write a good book and put it out there, and then let God do with it what he wants to do with it.
Yeah, very well stated.
Yeah.
So core message, and I'll use my example in this instance. I'm a speaker. I write about a number of different things. I have messages and research on a number of different topics. And I remember back in 2013, we first connected, and I came to you, and I was sold on what I wanted to write about. And I was there to try to convince you, like, Tom, help me write about what I think I want to write about. But after spending some time together in kind of a creative session of dialogue, you said, James, put that on a shelf for a message. You come alive when you talk about this victim thing. And I feel like you helped me discover a core message. Even though I can message a number of different things and I'm working on some other publishing materials, you helped me identify a core message. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of some writers can just write to a number of different topics, but then some writers have a core message that they can franchise, that really kind of comes out of their soul. You talked about their story. So can you give some advice on how to identify a core message or the importance of having a core message?
Yeah, it is important. I don't even remember what you wanted to write about. I don't have any memory of that.
Me either, because you shot it down.
I don't remember.
You shot it down bad.
But you mentioned the zero victim idea, and innately, I felt like that was your message. And I think that's one of the gifts that I'm blessed to have that God gave me, is to help people find or figure out what their life message, their core message is. And we each have one, right? But maybe we don't always know what that is. I think sometimes it takes another person to walk alongside us and to figure that out, what a core message is. And we all have favorite books and favorite authors, and a lot of times, sometimes you will find an author who writes a book that sells like wildly. It's very successful because it's their core message, and then they write another one that's not very successful. And why not? Because it's, for whatever reason, it's not their core message, right? It's important to stick with your core, right? And not try to speak to everything and to everybody. And I think those who stay true to that and don't abandon that are the ones that tend to be more successful as authors and as influencers. We are all known for something, right? So and these days there's so much noise, right? There's so much stuff going on in terms of news and media. It's easy to lose people's attention. And I think the only way to keep their attention is to keep writing and talking about the same thing over and over and over, right? That's how you capture attention.
Yeah, boy, man, you talked about capturing and keeping attention. Attention span is so short, and there's so much competition right now, this oversaturation of information. The sharper your core message and the more you dial into your story, the precision of it is the thing that really cuts through and gives you a seat at the table or a platform of, basically now in the digital marketing world now, brand. Like that's your brand. So what are your thoughts about a personal brand for a person who may be a little bit shy, who's kind of an introvert, probably kind of like us? We're not really like flamboyant kind of guys, but yet in the publishing space, in the business space, in the ministry space, the context now demands a clear brand. Otherwise, you cannot engage or keep the attention of an audience if your brand is not clear in terms of what separates you from the noise. So what are your thoughts about a brand, even for an author or people that are creating content right now?
It's interesting you would say that. Even last week, I was explaining to an author, when they think about their book title, don't think about it as a title, think about it as a brand, right? Because that's what a book is. It's a mini brand. It represents you and the message. So it's wise to think about it that way, especially in terms of the future. You don't know what's going to happen in the future with subsequent books, or you don't know how successful your book might be. So keeping that in mind, really front of mind, even as you're writing your book. This is my brand. This is going to be my brand. So what does that mean in terms of how I write this book, how I title this book, how I market and promote this book?
Now that let's say that feels a little prideful, a little braggadocious, a little arrogant, my brand. What would you say to someone who genuinely has a heart of humility and just aren't interested in promoting me. And even in a spiritual sense, I really want to promote Christ and not me.
Right.
But yet, to be effective in communicating right now, you do need to think in terms of a brand. So what would you say to kind of help that person, you know, step away from that idea that you're being selfish or prideful? No, this is what you need to do to be successful in the industry that you've been called to.
I hear that a lot from people. You know, what I say is remove yourself from it. You're not promoting yourself. You're promoting your message, right?
very well stated.
It's not your message. So, and you know, I find that generally, if people are attracted to your message, they don't think you're being self-promotional. They're interested in the message. They want what you have to offer, right? Which means that they want you because you are offering what they need and what they want. So put it aside. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. Don't worry about what people are going to say or think about you. A lot of times we're more concerned about the people that are closest to us, what they might think, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. What's your favorite book? You've done thousands of books. Do you have a favorite?
A favorite book that I've published, or just a favorite book
Published
that I've read?
or that you've read?
I mean, there are.
And why is it your favorite book? Whatever that is, like what gets you excited? What's your favorite book?
Man, there are so many, and you're gonna ask me to name just one book. I would think probably my favorite book of all time is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is a phenomenal book about an individual who was in the concentration camps. It's not a long book. It's a fairly short book.
Top of my list too.
Probably top 5, I would say. I don't know if I can name a number 1 book or not, but yeah.
Yeah, good deal. So let me ask you, you mentioned earlier you love going to libraries and bookstores are dwindling in number.
They are.
What are your thoughts about the advantages of still going to a library versus pulling everything up on your cell phone right now? Is there something distinctive, and are libraries still important institutions for an emerging generation that's used to, you know, Siri and Google? And we haven't even gotten into AI technology. And the next segment, I want to ask you your thoughts about that. But just talk about the institution of libraries and bookstores, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think they're still hugely important. I received good news last week. There's a Barnes & Noble going in, a new Barnes & Noble 15 minutes from my house.
Look at that. You're pretty excited.
I'm excited. You know, when you walk into a bookstore, you discover books and authors that you just cannot online, right? You can't do it. Because when you walk down an aisle in a bookstore, you see hundreds of authors and books right there in front of you at the same time, simultaneously. And I find myself picking up all sorts of books that I would never find in an online search, right? In an online search, you can only look at one book at a time.
Right.
Then you have to click on another one and another one. In a bookstore and a library, that's not the case. So I love them. I don't think they're going away. There is a resurgence in bookstores of late, actually. So I don't think they're going to disappear. I think people love the experience of going to a bookstore and the discovery that you can do. And bookstores are important too, because they're a gatekeeper, a key holder. They vet the good books for you, and there's value in that too.
Yeah. Wow, you just touched on something that I think is a huge liability. Is there's so much content out there that most of it is not good content, and you find whether as a writer, an author, or a singer, that sometimes the folks with the best content, most meaningful content, just don't get the traction that people who have lesser valued content who communicate it well. And so in other words, the bad stuff gets marketed well, and it kind of defines culture, defines environment, versus things that should, simply because they don't get the attention. And so just because it's popular doesn't mean it's good. And most folks can't sort through that. But you're saying the bookstores help with that process.
Yeah, and it's harder for an author than, let's say, for a musician. If you go to YouTube and to discover a new song or a new musician, or you just want to listen to something new, it doesn't take you very long to decide if you like that song or not, or that music. Sometimes it might take 15 seconds, right, for you to really get into a new singer or musician or whatnot. That's not the case for books. It takes a little longer than a few seconds to decide if you like that book or that author. So, and because of that, bookstores, I think, are hugely important as compared to the old record shops, which there are not many left. Although I guess people are buying albums again. So
that's coming back.
Back a little bit too. But yeah, they'll always be important.
Yeah, good deal. Well, folks, we're going to take a break here with my guest, really, really good friend, Tom Freiling, Chairman and CEO of Freiling Agency. Make sure you go to freilingagency.com masterfully.com to find out more about Tom's business and how he could potentially help you and your organization like he's done for so many others. We'll be back just a few moments. Thank you for joining me for Cultural Conversations, Meeting Cultural Challenges with Biblical Solutions. Friends, I want to thank you for supporting Cultural Conversations podcast, Meeting Cultural Challenges with Biblical Solutions. You know, my aim is to restore the art of respectful dialogue in dealing with the tough issues of our day from a biblical perspective. To see and listen to more great talks and interviews with interesting, inspiring, and intelligent people, visit tlnmedia.com/cultural conversations. And be sure to subscribe, like, and share our content with as many people as you can. It helps us out and helps us to help you by bringing you more great content. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching. All right, everybody, welcome back to Cultural Conversations for our second segment, here with my guest and good friend, Tom Freiling. Make sure you go to FreilingAgency.com to hear much more about Tom's work and how he can be a tremendous help to you and your organization, especially if you want to be in the top tier, that top 1%, 2%, 3%. You need a coach, and Tom is one of the best in our lifetime here, in our generation. So good to be here again, and we're going to keep digging into our conversation here in this next segment. I want to kind of toss a big idea here and talk about just publishing in general, the power of words, messaging, and communication. I think that communication is probably the most forceful idea that we have. Not just an idea, but the most forceful discipline, I would say. I would call communication a discipline. I think it probably drives life in all arenas more than anything else in life, is the power of words, the narrative, communication. I'm thinking about the fact that even the framers of our Constitution, for whatever reason, determined that the very First Amendment is predicated upon freedom of speech and freedom of the press. At a time, so much talk about censorship and cancel culture. What's your thought, big idea about the power of words, communication, the narrative, printing, publishing, the press, and how that literally determines the life and the direction of a society and a generation?
Yeah, that's true. And those societies where individuals have not had that right, the right to free speech or the right to free press, in almost every case, they end up to be anti-God societies, right?
Wow.
Because the government doesn't want the idea of God or Christ or the Christian message to be distributed, talked about, communicated in print or in media. So I believe that in part, the framers of the Constitution, that was so important to them because freedom of religion was also important to them. And without the freedom of press and speech, we have no freedom of religion as well. Yeah. So those are all tied together very closely. So I think in America today, that's something we need to be cognizant of, really, and guard those rights, because I do believe that if those first two are violated, the ones you're talking about, eventually freedom of religion will be violated also.
Well, man, you just spoke to something that I think should stir not only every Christian, but especially every Christian leader, every pastor, every theologian, every individual that would communicate the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's a message. It's the word of God, and not having the freedom to communicate that, and the end result of society becoming a godless society, I think that is a massive point that we need to embrace right now. You've done a lot of research. The power of the book, the Bible, is a book. Why? What does that have to do with faith and the kind of transformation that God desires to bring in the lives of people, in consolidating his message into a book and the history of that book? How has that book changed the world, practically speaking? That's
a good question. I asked myself a similar question. What is it about the gospel? Why did the gospel spread so wildly in the early church, right? It, in part, is because of the book and the emergence of the book. Before the time of Christ, books were scrolls, right? Giant scrolls that the common man could not read, did not possess, and rarely saw. Certainly didn't read them, right? Around the time of Christ, the Codex was created or invented. And the Codex was essentially a small book about the size of a phone. And it was written on a papyrus or almost a bark-like material. And these were widely distributed throughout the Roman Empire around the time of Christ. And many of them were the stories of Christ. It was the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, written and distributed independently of each other because there wasn't a canonized Bible at the time. I believe that was one of the primary reasons that the Gospel became so popular in Rome, is because for the first time in history, people could read a book. And the books were about Jesus. Right, and this really helped the church grow in the very early days of the church, because it wasn't just somebody telling them the story; they could actually read it, for themselves. But it is interesting. Saint Augustine once noted something about a bishop named Ambrose, and he noted that Bishop Ambrose would read silently to himself. He actually wrote this, and that he was famous, I guess you'd say, become a celebrity because he could read to himself. And I read that. That was really quite interesting that would be noted. And I did a little bit more research, and it came to me. I realized that prior to that time, nobody read to themselves. You didn't read silently. Somebody read to you. So about that same time, around the time of Christ, people, for the first time, read silently to themselves. They began to read books that way. I mean, it seems almost unbelievable to us now that you wouldn't pick up a book and read it to yourself. But prior to that time, people didn't do that. They didn't know you could do that.
Wow. What you're saying follows the progression in Scripture of Jesus in the beginning of his ministry, going into the temple, reading from the scrolls. But then you see the proliferation of the gospel saturating society, that Paul is now writing letters in a much smaller format that could be distributed. And that was the basis of his, first, second, third, his missionary journeys was really a publishing.
Yes, it was the written word.
He was in the publishing ministry, really.
Correct.
As much as him traveling. So I think that's a very important insight, just to see the connection between books and our faith and the gospel.
And we don't think of Paul as being self-promotional, right? We don't think of him as a marketer. He didn't think of himself that way. He was marketing the gospel. He was promoting the gospel.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've looked at that several times. I think in Galatians, when he made reference once to my gospel. Well, it's not the gospel of Paul, but there is a Pauline brand. And to this day in Bible school, you're going to study Pauline theology. It was his messaging and his words, his communication of the gospel message that really, really began to awaken the church and cause the spread of the gospel.
That's true. And his ability to write and to distribute his writing is why
he had a brand.
He had a brand, and that's why he is so remembered today. The other of the 12 disciples, whether it was, any of them, they apparently didn't write as much as Paul did, and maybe that's why we don't have as much familiarity with what they said. He was talking about. Exactly. We're talking about Paul because he kept on writing and writing and writing and distributing.
So talk a little bit about, just a number of different things. There's been this institutional shift from traditional publishing houses to hybrid publishing and then self-publishing. Like on that spectrum from traditional to hybrid to self-publishing, where do you think we are on that spectrum, and what are the advantages of being on one end versus the other end?
Traditional publishing, when you say that, goes back, hundreds of years. In America, maybe 150 years, when publishers would approach authors, or authors would approach publishers, and an author would hire a publisher to help them with not just the writing, but the distribution of the book. Right. In fact, in the old days, more than 100 years ago, publishers would hire women to go door to door to pre-sell books. Right. They called them subscriptions. Women? I don't know why women. Maybe they were harder to say no to. I'm not sure.
Actually, I heard somebody talking about that recently, that that women are easier to say yes to? Somebody just had that conversation, so that's an interesting
I'm sure
note
that's the case. One
yeah.
publisher hired 10,000 women to go door to door across America, pre-selling books. This is back in the 1920s and 30s. Traditional publishing was, for many years, virtually the only way to publish a book because it was very expensive to print a book and to distribute a book. Maybe 20 years ago, the cost was reduced radically by digital technology, print on demand and just-in-time technology that allowed a book to be published in much smaller quantities, even one at a time. So suddenly it was not hugely expensive to publish a book anymore. The expense is printing the book. It's
right.
when you had to print 20,000 copies or whatnot.
Yeah. You got some warehouse of your own book, some warehouse filled with 3,000 copies of your own book. Yeah.
You had to risk a lot of your own money just to do that. Now you don't have to. So as a result, it's been democratized, I like to say, and that is what has caused the emergence of self-publishing, which is very popular. Now, the problem with self-publishing is that you're doing everything on your own, and many times you don't really know what you're doing. So we can do almost anything ourselves these days. Like, if I have a plumbing problem at the house, I might go to YouTube first. And try to see if I can fix it that way. And then I often regret doing that because I didn't hire a professional to come in and do it the right way, right? It happens in publishing too. So the hybrid publisher emerged really over the last 5 to 10 years as a professional publisher that is experienced enough to publish books the traditional way, the way that traditional houses, publish books. The author still invests their funds into the project like they would, like a self-publisher would, but they're hiring a professional to help them do it the right way.
Right. So would you suggest that hybrid publishing, I guess it's not an equal comparison, but would you suggest that hybrid publishing is probably the best way for an entry-level author is to take that approach? I guess self-publishing would be cheaper, you kind of do it yourself, but the challenge with self-publishing, I guess, is also there are no gatekeepers. And so just because somebody is self-published, they can self-publish heresy and information that is really, really toxic and really bad for you, but it's available. So would you say that hybrid publishing is probably the best landing spot?
My answer is yes. I think we can all spot a self-published book from a mile away. It's not hard. And this just goes back to what I just said. It's not as easy as one might think to publish a book professionally, and you're not going to make an impact if it's not done professionally. Barnes & Noble's not going to stock a book if it doesn't look and feel like a professionally published book, right? So I think that's the trap that some self-published authors fall into, thinking they can do it on their own because it's inexpensive, but the fact of the matter is it is a business like any other business, and it has to be a quality. And that's where the hybrid publisher helps to take that book up a level, up a notch, to compete with the traditionally published books.
I want to kind of go back to something you mentioned a little while ago about the connection between books and our faith, because one of the big sticking points in society right now is that you're hearing about school boards across the nation that have allowed books with immoral content about children and gender and gender dysphoria and all these kinds of things coming into the libraries, into elementary schools and middle schools. Books still help to shape morality and the value system of a nation. So can you just talk about that a little bit in terms of the detriment of allowing books in the formative years of a child and their development years being inserted in that space? Why the book format? Why the book format?
Well, I think we can all identify books we read as children that had an impact on our lives, right? They are important from very
James and the Giant Peach, the Nancy Drew series.
Certainly. Books are both a reflection of the culture, but then they also dictate the direction of our culture. It's both of those things. And so what we're seeing today, in terms of what you're just talking about, it is a reflection of the culture, where the culture is at. The problem, though, is if you just allow it to be just that, a reflection of the culture, well, doesn't get you anywhere, right? You want your books and your authors to move society and culture in a positive direction, right? So, in that case, the schools are, I think a very symbolic place where we're seeing, this play out right now.
Yeah. Printed material is intended to indoctrinate, and that's something I think that we have to pay attention at a time when, moral subjectivity is kind of at an all-time high.
Yeah.
When something goes to print, whether it's a book or an article or something, someone behind that work has an agenda, and they have something that they're trying to communicate.
Certainly.
So the book industry, the publishing industry, which crosses over into the media space, you've been in politics. Talk a little bit about the agenda that someone somewhere is pushing an agenda, even in terms of determining what gets published, what doesn't get published. I think media companies, media agencies, just like publishers, have certain authors that they will and will not listen to because they got a certain idea or brand that they want to promote. And unfortunately, I think that affects the publishing industry just like any other industry, that there's oftentimes an agenda, behind these institutions or the gatekeepers that really kind of determine what goes out or what doesn't go out.
There are only 5 large publishers left in America, 5.
Really?
And a vast majority of the books you will see, for example, in a Barnes & Noble, come out of those 5 companies.
Okay.
Now, you don't always know that when you look at the logo on the book. It might not be the Random House or the HarperCollins, the big names we're familiar with. Oftentimes, it's an imprint or a division of one of those companies.
Okay.
So yeah, to speak to what you just said, somebody in those 5 companies, a very few individuals, are deciding most of what gets published in America today. Unfortunately, those individuals are not always making the kind of decisions that you and I feel are good for our country.
Yeah. That goes back to the power of the narrative, and shaping a culture. I think this is a big deal, and I'm really, really glad, Tom, that you're leading us into this discussion, because I think it's something that we just haven't paid enough attention to, concerning the spiritual and the moral decline that I think in some ways we're on in America. I use the language that the new civil war is what I call ideological warfare. And I use this term of emotional weapons of mass destruction. And I think it's all around words and communication and narratives. You said it a few moments ago, that books, words, publishing dictates culture. So in other words, it's used to define and to literally demand what people should be. I heard a quote the other day that was pretty fascinating. It says that typical thinking is you thinking about an idea. Critical thinking is you thinking about thinking. And I don't think we're doing a lot of critical thinking. We're not taught to do critical thinking anymore, because the narrative is saying we're thinking for you. We've done the thinking for you. Here's the book, here's the publishing, here's the article, here's the media. We did the thinking for you. We don't need you to think critically anymore. But reading and writing is a way to kind of break out of that. That brings us back to the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press.
And this goes back to the early church and around the time of Christ and after Christ resurrected. A lot of the books were about him. A lot of the books that were written and distributed were about Christ. In the Roman Empire, I think a vast majority of the books that were the most popular, the Codex, the small book, were about Jesus. Today in America, are most of the books that you see on the bookshelf about Jesus, if you walk into a Barnes & Noble? No.
Interesting.
No.
Yeah.
Now, the Bible's still the #1 best-selling book in America every day. But beyond that, if you look at the New York Times bestsellers charts, how many of those books are about Christ?
Yeah.
Not very many.
Very interesting. Yeah. I've studied in the 1800s or so, the big 3 disciplines in academia were medicine, law, and theology. And I find that interesting that theology was front and center, that it was historically always believed that we need to be a religious and a moral people to be our best, to perform our best. And so medicine, law, and religion and theology were the big 3 of academia. And now you see these institutions have shifted completely away from that. Like you said, even in print, in book format, you just don't see a lot concerning faith anymore. that has everything to do with the direction that our society is going in. I'm here with Tom Freiling, Chairman and CEO of Freiling Agency. Go to freilingagency.com to read so much more about Tom's work. Part of an advisor to the Harvard Business Review, the Forbes Business Council, best-selling author, been publishing a number of influential authors, more than $100 million in revenues. Tom is a veteran in the industry and a coach of influential leaders. I want to talk about a couple more things in our time. AI is the big thing right now. So just a different day that we live in. You know, you can take us back with publishing before the time of Christ, around the time of Christ for the past 2,000 years. And now there's this like almost similar to the gold rush before, there's like the AI rush right now of who can develop the best app to develop artificial intelligence. And you can tell an app on your phone, write me a 100-word, 200-word article about this, and in half a second, you get this article that's fairly well written. What is that, Tom? How do you deal with that? What does that mean for traditional publishing, for readers and writers? And I guess here, AI doesn't have a soul. So what can you say about AI technology? The good use of it and the not so good use of it. I know for busy people, executives who have deadlines to meet might say it's a great tool that I don't need to pay an assistant, $70,000. I can utilize these apps to do some of my writing for me. So just what are your thoughts on AI technology, where we are, where that's going, the pros and the cons of it?
It's a good question. I don't know where it's going. I don't think anybody knows where it's going yet. I don't think there's any escaping it. I don't think we can run from it. Remember when the internet emerged around the year 2000, we didn't know where it was headed either, right? Nobody knows. So I don't think we know with this either. I can say that you're right. It can write very quickly and it writes pretty well. But there's a lot that AI doesn't know. AI doesn't know what's inside of you. It doesn't know what's inside of me. It doesn't know my experiences. It doesn't know who the people who are my friends. It doesn't know who I love. It doesn't know anything about us. It only knows what AI knows, and it will never know, who we are. And you've probably asked AI a few questions about Christ and about God, and it gives you some crazy answers.
Right.
I don't think it's ever going to, it's not ever going to give you the truth because it doesn't know the truth. It's an algorithm. It's a database. So I think in business there will be a lot of applications that will radically change how we do business. I think we should be careful. I think we should be careful, in the use of an application of it. But it's hard for me to predict what it's going to mean for publishing, what it's going to mean for books. I don't know, but I'm not afraid of it. Because it's not God. It can't even get close to that. Obviously.
Very well stated, sir. So content creation. I tell our staff sometimes we have to feed the content creation beast. He's hungry. And just this ravenous appetite, you almost can't create enough. You almost can't write enough right now. So what would you share in terms of good content creation? What is good content creation? You talked earlier about folks being able to develop their story, but how do you even approach it? For the person that's out there that maybe they're doing something significant, they're influential, but they just don't even know where to start. And maybe they're not even familiar with the language of content creation. What would you say to that individual?
You're right. People are ravenous for it. And I think the first thing about content creation is you do have to create a lot of content if you're going to make an impact. It has to be a continual stream. That's what people want and that's what they expect. Number two, I think you have to insert yourself into the content. It has to be personal. The best content creators are the ones that you feel like you know them and you're a part of their lives. And for some people, they're not up for that because it takes a lot to want to do that, right? To put yourself out there. I mean, it can get as personal as this is what I had for dinner. This is what I'm getting in an airplane to go where, to do what. People like to be plugged into other people's lives, so that's super important. And then number three, the content has to be impactful. It has to be meaningful, right? It has to speak into the lives of those who are consuming the content. If you can do all three of those things well, then I think that's the formula for success. But you have to be willing to do it. You have to have the time to do it. It is time consuming for sure. And it's not a simple thing to do. It's free, which is great, but it's not simple.
Yeah. Free, not simple, but again, just very competitive, short attention span. It's like, I guess the encouragement, like as we're, coming to a close here for anyone who's a content creator or wants to write, I'm finding that you have to do about 20 different things. I call it, you have to raise the tide of the water for the boats to float. In other words, I think some folks think, I'm gonna write a book and that's one boat, that's just one entity, but if the tide concerning the water is low, that boat's not gonna go anywhere. So what we do, and some of the success I think that we're seeing, is that I like to focus on raising the tide, and that means you gotta have 20 or 15 different things that you're doing, that there's some synergy. Messaging, publishing, communication is at the heart of that. But it just seems like in this new digital space, this new world of digital communication, you got to kind of create really a context where the tide is being raised. And that allows your book or your publishing or your social media or your podcast and all those kinds of things to float, because you're building a greater base. And you probably hear it more than me. Sometimes folks will see what we're doing and say, I want to write a book and I think it's going to be great. It's a really, really complicated process. And I find that there's no roadmap, and the strategy between two individuals is completely different. My strategy might be completely different than your strategy. We both need a strategy. But it's just kind of like we're in the wild, wild west of digital media right now, that there's no formula for how to be successful in this space. And so you've seen the change and the transition over the years. What are your thoughts in our remaining time of just navigating into the unknown from traditional publishing all the way to AI, but there's just no rules in this wide open space, in this blank canvas of digital media? How do you even start being successful in that?
I think you have to be patient with it, and you have to be diligent with it. Sometimes it happens overnight, but it usually doesn't happen overnight, right? I mean, we've all read, I forget who said it first, but my overnight success took 30 years or something like that, right? So sometimes it does, but you really do have to be patient and diligent and focused. And I've watched you over the last decade with your zero victim message and book do that. You're a plotter, and you've plotted for 10 years since that book was published, and now look today. Now it's a best-selling book and a message that people are familiar with and they know, but it didn't happen overnight, right? You had to work at it. So I think we forget, because we think we live in an instant society, so success should be instant, but it isn't. It isn't usually. I think you have to be patient and diligent.
Last thing, just any advice you would give to a person that step number one, what do I do first of all? And then the second thing, if there are some folks out there who are really key influencers who are looking for that top 1%, maybe share a little bit how Freiling Agency can help them. Like you've helped me tremendously. Excited about the future here, but talking to that 1%. So two things for the person: step number one, what would I do? But then for people who want to be in that top 1%, how can Freiling Agency help them to have the kind of impact that they're looking for?
Yeah, I think where we add the most value is helping the individual really focus in and define who they are and what their message is. And we talked about that at the very beginning of our discussion today. And that's the most important thing to figure out. Who am I? What is my message going to be? You can't do anything until you figure that part out. Once you figure that out and you have a good handle on that, then you can start writing your book. Then you can start your social media. Then you can start your podcast. But if you don't do that first, you're just wandering in the desert. and then you end up just sort of you're just like the wind, right? And you'll be all over the place.
Yeah.
And no one is ever really going to attach themselves to who you are on your message. I think that's the greatest value that we can offer, and of course doing everything with excellence and professionalism because people expect it.
Yeah.
And that's not always a simple thing either, as you know.
Yeah. I'll end with a quote. I believe Warren Buffett said it. I read a few years ago. He said it's very expensive to look cheap. So we'll leave you with that. It's very expensive to look cheap. Thanks for joining me. Man, it's been a delight being here with my friend, my publishing partner, Tom Freiling, CEO, chairman of Freiling Agency. Go to FreilingAgency.com. If you want to be in that top 1%, Tom's your guy. He can help you to develop your craft and your brand and your message, your story, to be razor sharp, to enter into that space and make the kind of impact that you desire to see happen. Thanks for joining me again. Cultural Conversations podcast, meeting cultural challenges with biblical solutions. Make sure you go to tlmmedia.com/cultural conversations for more episodes of the podcast. Till next time, James Ward, it's been great with you. I'll see you then.